A $5,000 camera setup won't save you if the image is flat. Without intentional lighting, interesting framing, or a fitting color palette, your shot will just not reach its full potential. Because here's the truth, all of these tools exist for one reason: to create depth. And in this video, I'll show you exactly how I use them to create this cinematic dinner scene. And by the way, this video is not sponsored by any brands that I mention. I'm just using what I personally own. The first way to create depth is through lighting. So I positioned a light stand with my key light and a big softbox onto the table in the living room. I used an Amaranth 200X and set it to 3200 Kelvin on 29% intensity, which, as you can see here, is way too bright and harsh on my face. I positioned it in a top-down angle to mimic a typical living room lamp coming from above. The 45-degree angle helped me avoiding these harsh shadows under my eyes and instead resulted in an overall well-lit face. Still, you can see that here, the light was way too hard. Now, I could have just turned down the intensity, but that just basically lowers the exposure without softening the light. So what I needed was another layer of diffusion to make sure my skin is soft but still well lit. To achieve this, I set up two C-stands with a big diffusion panel right below the softbox. And because this panel was so close to me, the light source relative to my face became huge, and that made the skin much softer while keeping the same 29% output. Remember, the bigger the light source relative to the subject, the softer the light. Definitely looks better and much softer, as you can see here. Now, yes, you could also again lower the intensity and just move the softbox closer, but there's a big but. Look at this comparison. The softbox alone only lights me. With the diffusion panel though, some of the light bounces back into the ceiling, raising the ambient exposure in the background. That gives us more details in the shadows and more room to play with in post. I would argue it's a massive game changer in this setup, and it's the first big step towards creating depth in this scene. Speaking of massive, I really love images with heavy contrast, just like in those 90s movies. So here's a second way to create depth: through contrast. And even though you can see that here we already have a good amount, I wanted to double down even more, which is why I placed this light skirt on the diffusion panel to block some light from hitting the left side of my face. I made the reflecting side point upwards, which also enhances the reflection into the ambient exposure of the room, which means we get more subtle background fill even without adding another light. And I made sure to only cover half of the panel, so the rest of the light still reaches my face, while of course creating contrast on the other side. Let's see, I'd say I crushed them shadows real good. But to go even further, I placed a negative fill next to the table, deepening the shadows even more. Might be a little overkill, but as I said, sometimes I just like to crush them shadows real good. That overall pattern of light and shadows is what gives more dimension and depth to the image. Now, if you look here, we see some foreground as well, which in my opinion instantly adds to the dinner vibe. Plus, it helps us with depth. For that, I placed some fake flowers and a small glass bottle onto the table. And since I don't drink, I didn't have wine. So I had to improvise with a bottle of limoncello that someone gave me as a gift a while ago, and that I thought I could mix with water so it kind of looked like white wine. And as you can see, it looks more like, I don't know, dinosaur piss. And just a little fail in the whole set design. Another problem I faced was that the foreground was way too dark and looked unnatural with the top light. Remember the skirt that I placed on that one side that blocked the light? So I solved it with this budget-friendly Ambitful A2 light tube and set it to 1% intensity and 3300 Kelvin to give the glass in the bottle a little more punch. Tiny detail, but look what it does. It's one of those things you wouldn't really notice if you didn't know, but I think it makes it more professional. What you might have noticed though is another thing that I screwed up. With the light skirt, I also blocked the light from reaching the flowers on the left side here. And unfortunately, I didn't notice it when I filmed this thing, so I had to figure out a way to solve it in post. Luckily, since this is a static tripod shot without any movement, I simply took my key light only scene from the beginning and then masked out the flowers and layered them on top of my final shot. That way, everything matches perfectly together. Dumb mistake, but nothing that you cannot solve in post. Now, depth comes also from how you frame a shot. I decided to use the foreground as kind of a guideline to achieve the so-called golden cut. You see how the flower is the biggest object, then comes the bottle, then the glass, then my body, and then my head? This was all intentional. I used a 50mm lens for this medium close-up shot and positioned the camera in a 45-degree angle to myself on the shadow side, so the image has some room to breathe on the left side. I went fully manual on focus and I shot the whole thing on 25 fps, 1/50th shutter speed, an aperture wide open of 1.2, which also adds much more depth in terms of the depth of field, ISO of 640, and a white balance of 3200 Kelvin, so the key light is slightly warmer. Through these layers of foreground, middle ground and background, and the overall framing, depth is even more visible. Lastly, depth through color. So the last thing that I think makes the scene look good are the colors. And I'm not only talking about the color grade, but rather the base for that, how I designed my set. So the color palette here is built around just a few strong accents. The red shirt and the yellow flowers sitting on one side of the color wheel, while the background falls into cooler bluish tones. It's a rather simple palette, so nice and easy to look at while creating depth through color contrast. It's also what makes it easier to color grade in post, which in this case was a mix between DEHANCER Pro and Final Cut color tools. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a professional colorist, but if you want to see more in-depth color grading, at least how I do it, just let me know in the comments. And now, for the last time, let's look at the final result. Even with my mistakes, this final shot proves how much understanding depth in lighting, framing, and colors matter more than just a good camera. And I love my camera, it's a freaking beast. But if you enjoyed this breakdown, let me know in the comments what kind of scene I should recreate next. Anyways, I guess I'll see you in the next one. Peace.